I don't think we can sigh to start the episode.
Welcome to the But Why podcast, where we explore the human experience through a psychological lens by asking, but why? I'm Dr. Kristin.
And I'm Dr. Laura, and today we are exploring neurodiverse experiences of burnout. And this, of course, follows on from our last episode, which was on burnout, kind of in general. So for those of you who are tuning in right now but haven't listened to our previous burnout episode, we suggest that you maybe go back and have a little listen. But if you just want to stay with us here and you're not bothered about the previous episode, then we'll give you a bit of a definition. So here we're kind of defining burnout as a state of kind of physical, emotional, mental exhaustion, caused by prolonged or excessive stress. And it arises when someone feels overwhelmed, emotionally drained, or unable to meet constant demands of simply being alive. So this might be from work, caregiving, and other responsibilities. And over time, it can really impact our physical and mental well-being and productivity and so on. But today we're going to be talking about experiences of burnout for people who are neurodiverse. But before we go into that, Kristin, I don't know if there's anything you want to say, update us on?
Yeah, I know, we have to fit in our little small talk. We didn't plan any small talk for today.
Yeah. I was I just went straight into it. People are going to be what's happened? Why have we not tangented for 20 minutes?
I mean, we'll have many tangents, I'm sure. To everyone who's wondering, if you're listening, I sound like I'm a chain smoker. We are recording 2 episodes today because I had to cancel Monday because I had no voice, and today's the best it's been in about a week. And then also, if you can see my face, I had microneedling done on Tuesday, so if I look like a peeling lizard, that's also why. So I'm thriving. And maybe I am starting to get a little bit burnt out because I feel like my executive function, which actually I'll just give you all that definition right now. So executive dysfunction, this is a disruption to the kind of overall efficacy. So how your executive functions work. So this is your group of cognitive processes, that they regulate. They control all of your cognitive processes, so behavioral expression, memory, just really basic human skills, processing, transitioning between tasks and things like that. It's very disrupted. And I feel like that was me this morning because I have my water bottle yesterday with me in my office, and I'm so routine. I walk in and out with my water bottle, my phone, and my coffee cup every single time. Did the same yesterday. And I literally, before I came in here, just spent the last 15 minutes wandering around my house looking for my water bottle. And I can't remember where it is. And I'm just wandering around aimlessly. There's only so many places it can go. And I'm looking all confused. Then I came into my office, forgot my headphones, went back out, started looking for my water bottle again. And forgot to bring my headphones in. It's just been one of those mornings where my executive function is not functioning. Ain't no function here.
I feel you on that. I think for the last few weeks for me have been some of the most work intensive, and that's really been impacting on, I don't know, I guess my ability to function. But I feel at the moment I'm at that point where I know I have loads to do, so I'm almost forcing myself to do it, but it's probably not in the most efficient way. But I also have that classic thing where I don't know, it's fine in the morning when I'm get up and I'm in the kitchen and it's a complete tip, because it always is, and I'm okay, I need to clean this thing up, so I'm cleaning that thing, and then you see something else and I'm oh, I need to do that, or oh, I need to do this, and I go round and round in a circle, and then I'm what was I even doing in the first place? I haven't even done it yet.
Yes,
so
I live with a partner who does that
time.
Constantly. Yes, I know exactly what that looks like.
But sometimes, right? Sometimes it feels like I'm being really productive because I'm thinking, I feel like I'm thinking really fast, oh, there's this, and now I need to do this, now I need to do this, now I need to do that. But in reality, I've only actually done half of every task rather than finishing the entire task.
You know what I'm thinking, Laura.
Yeah, I do. Oh, well.
Oh gosh. Speaking
I
of
think
like,
get it from my mum.
yeah, yeah, many do, many do. Um, yeah, speaking of morning routines, my whole morning, maybe this is why my executive function was so bad, was spent avoiding people at my house because it was just one of those mornings that we
Ah.
had like the plumber coming, the farrier was coming, and thankfully Jack agreed to handle all of those things. But the
Did you
plumber
say
had to like,
farrier?
yeah, for the horses, like they
What is a
do.
farrier?
Oh, so it's like, when you go to the nail salon and get your nails done and they
I
shorten your nails?
suppose.
It's like that for hooves for horses. So like
Oh.
horses' hooves are basically like the same material as our nails, obviously a lot stronger, but they grow similarly to our nails. And so you have to
Mm.
have somebody like shave them down so that they're like a healthy, otherwise they grow like, how people's nails get really long and gross. Hooves can do the
Mm.
same if they're not,
Oh.
um, you know, so, and some people we don't, but some people put like horseshoes on. You've seen horseshoes before,
Yeah.
that go on the hooves to protect them if they're like riding on cement or road surfaces and stuff like that, or if their hooves are just like not great quality. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
But
it's
you don't
like,
do that.
no, we don't, because we don't really ride them on the road, and most of ours have pretty good hooves. It's usually
I love
like
how
for
you
the,
say hooves.
how would you say hooves?
I think I say like hoof. No,
Well,
a horse's hoof.
that's
I
one
don't know.
though. That's singular.
So
Plural
it'd be
is,
hooves.
yeah, that sounds more British. Yeah. I'm trying to think of what like the farrier actually says. But anyway, like standing there with the
Anyway.
farrier for like 30 minutes, just standing there awkwardly with this guy making small talk is physically painful to me. So Jack usually does that.
Oh,
But then he also booked the plumber for this morning without telling me. And so he was like, okay, I'll handle that too, because he just booked it and he forgot and didn't tell me. But then the plumber was like going all around our house, and it was like early. So when I was having my coffee, my morning human making coffee. And so it was just
yes.
like bopping around to different rooms in the house, like moving opposite side the house where the plumber was and trying to escape him constantly.
Oh my gosh. I know that feeling. Yeah.
That was you when the person was there fixing your washing machine, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And also I also feel that even when, right, if we have the people coming to like clean our windows,
Mm.
I feel like I can't like if you're in the room that like they're cleaning the window and I'm like, I need to move because
Yeah.
they can like see me. I feel like I need to get out of this room.
I'm
I don't
exactly.
know. It's so awkward. And
But
then
you're
like
like,
in our kitchen we have like quite big like bifolding doors. So
oh
like and
God,
there's no
you can't
curtains. So
escape.
there's like no escape. And then they're like doing the windows and I'm there like trying to make a cup of tea and I like feel so perceived. I'm like
That's what I
I
was gonna say, is that like just knowledge that you're perceived and you're like, okay, now I need to act a certain way.
yeah.
Like, there was Jack had got some like gardeners. We've got like these big vine thingies that are too heavy for our roof. And they put it's because I was so unprepared. I was just like folding some laundry in the bedroom, and somebody climbed up the ladder and started just like not even looking in the room, just started cutting stuff. And I was like, oh, and they just slammed all the blinds shut right in their face. And I'm like, now they're gonna think I'm even weirder. Like,
Mm, I always feel too bad if I like try and close the curtains. That's yeah. Like, I'm
uh,
just gonna sneak away and hide in the
in my
corridor.
in my own house, I do that sometimes. If
Yeah.
there's like a delivery person coming and I don't want to be involved, I just like go against the wall.
That's like the worst thing if you get like a takeaway is like who's going to answer the door and I'm always like I really don't want to answer it, like I can't do it. Matt's like, but I'm in my pajamas. I'm like, oh, why did I get dressed appropriately? Like now I have
Yep,
to answer the door.
that's the skill, is never be dressed to see
Ne-
visitors.
yes, always be dressed inappropriately, then you don't have to
Yes,
answer the door.
exactly. I saw some like older woman online, advice basically said like, when somebody's at the door and you don't know what they want, always put a coat on or have a coat in your hand, so that depending on if you want to talk to them or not, you can say, oh, I just got home, or oh, I'm just on my way out, I'm in a rush.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I've never
That
done
is a
it,
good idea.
but Yeah,
No,
my
no,
resting
no.
bitch face usually does the trick. So,
Yeah. I also think it's interesting though that there's the need to have the coat. Like it's not you
mm,
can't just say I need to I'm going out. You have to have the coat as evidence, otherwise it doesn't work.
true. Yeah, like what if it's the summer and it's really hot? You just look crazy.
Yes.
You can't just say,
Mm.
no, I'm not in the mood.
Yeah, no.
I have
Mm.
had though, like you just it is goes back down to that performance, whether it's like gender or social performances, and I guess relating to our episode today, like that autistic need for like physical boundaries and stuff like that. I did have once a few years ago, like a good friend basically say like I just like I don't understand why you never like we haven't seen each other for and this was a guy like we haven't seen each other for like 6 months and you never want to give me a hug and it's just like I feel like you don't like me. I'm like no, I don't like hugs. I feel like I can connect with you over way more meaningful things than touching our shoulders together and having this horrible, awkward experience. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And I was just like, why does that like the prescribed social thing that you're supposed to do? It's so weird.
It is,
Yeah.
isn't it? I always find that like I think I am I a hugger? I feel like I'm a hugger of specific people.
Yes, exactly. But
um
that goes down to consent.
yeah, yeah. But then with a few people, and especially with like, actually with like quite a few of like Matt's friends, like I feel like I've known them for so long, but I'm not sure if a hug is appropriate. So I kind of just awkwardly stand there and I'm like, I don't really know what to do. And I just like stand there and wave instead. And I think that's fine, but who knows?
It's that that makes me kind of think of after my presentation at Basie's. So I did a presentation last was it 2 weeks ago now at a conference British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences. Oh, that's a mouthful when you can't speak. On like working as an autistic sport and exercise psych, and I finished my presentation and like all the questions were over and Amy, who was the moderator of it, was like, okay, Kristin, that was awesome, thanks. And I didn't know what to do, like how to leave, so I just did like a really awkward double thumbs up like this.
No.
Oh my god, why are these
That was so appropriate.
for people that are just listening and not watching? Fireworks just happened behind me. Why is this
Oh,
happening?
wow.
Let me try again. It didn't happen again. Oh, it did happen again.
Oh, there you
Well,
go. Oh my gosh, that's so
I
strange.
wonder.
Well, someone commented back, didn't they, to your Twitter post when
Yes.
last time balloons came up, and they said it was something to do with Apple. Didn't I think? Is that
Oh,
right?
really? I didn't actually
I
read
think
what
they
they
said it
said.
was something to do with Apple Mac settings that you
Oh,
can
okay.
turn off. I
I
don't
don't
think it's
think I
me.
want to.
You'll
No, but
see. I don't get
I really liked
fireworks.
you doing that though. It's not working. Oh,
There you
really
go.
weird.
I think it's
Okay.
yeah, Apple. That's it.
Speaking of tangents.
Okay, yes. So what's happening?
Uh,
Where are we?
so I suppose, you know what, 13 minutes and we've also done a little mini introduction, so I'm pretty proud of us.
That is good. Good effort.
Yeah. On a Friday when we're not functioning properly. Great. Um, so before we get started talking about neurodiverse burnout, there's a few terms I want to define up front and just want to preempt this by saying like we're not giving purely academic definitions. A lot of this is also influenced by the relative neurodiverse, in this case autism and ADHD communities, because historically the medical diagnostic kind of more deficit criteria more explains symptoms of overwhelm and burnout and rather than like actual traits themselves. And these aren't perfect definitions. They're just to kind of give people a good idea of things. So there's a few different conceptualizations of this, and they vary in their alignment to kind of more social or political or medical models, depending on what you're looking at. But overall, it's how we kind of value and really celebrate the neurodiversity as a kind of typical difference in your kind of brains rather than it's a natural variation of neurotype rather than like something that is wrong with you. So it's basically, so I think it's the range is like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia. I always hate saying this, dyscalculia, Dyscalculia. I
Oh yeah, I think I always say dyscalculia, but that is not correct.
we
That's
know
just like a
that sounds
shortcut.
better. I just keep looking at it and want to say Dracula, Count Dracula.
Yeah, culia.
Yeah, which is like difficulty with numbers, OCD and dyspraxia. And dyspraxia, I forget what dyspraxia is. Is that when? Oh
Is
shoot!
it something to do with like movement and
Oh
something more
yes,
to do
it's
with movement based, isn't it?
yeah, it's like kind of like difficulties or differences in coordination, basically.
Ah,
Which
okay,
I,
okay,
yeah.
yes.
And the reason they're all neurodiverse is because they come from kind of the layout of your neurons in your brain. And we're still learning a lot about neurodiversity, like the concept is evolving. And so there's a lot up in the air, but because we're kind of like touching on the basics. So overall, it's a range of differences in individual brain function, behavioral traits, characteristics, and it's kind of regarded as just like a normal variation of the human population rather than like something negative about the person.
Hmm.
Um, and like I said, there's a big thing for me, and especially in the autistic community, saying that a lot of autistic traits that are diagnosable are actual symptoms of distress. So, like meltdowns and things like that. And so it's almost impossible to get diagnosed as autistic under the current diagnostic criteria without being burnt out or under distress. And so there's a big issue with that. So, just touching on that a little bit, autism is a processing difference that can impact, well, that does impact every area of your life. Essentially, autistic people have more and denser neural pathways. And so everyone goes through a pruning process of their neurons when you're in early childhood. So it's almost like if you're not using that neuron, so if you're not learning a third language, then you're going to lose the neurons that have that capacity. And it's pruning to basically make your thought processes more efficient. But what happens in something that happens with autistic people is they keep 40% more of their neurons and neuronal pathways, um, especially in their prefrontal cortex, which is the area that is responsible for processing like logic and stuff like that. And so that's kind of where it comes from. And so it really changes how you process the world. So you've got different and more things to process. So that can lead to what's perceived as delayed processing, differences in communication, differences in sensory experiences, and things like that. And so there's no typical autistic person, and everyone has their own strengths and differences and needs. So I can't, it's like, there's like that idea of the autistic person who's just blunt, doesn't care, can't handle stimuli, melting down, whereas that's not typically it. So I don't want to get too much into all the differences because I think it spans a lot. So if anyone's more interested in learning more about autism and ADHD aside from like a normal, just pure definition, let us know because we'll do an episode on it. Whereas ADHD is like the really flamboyant cousin of autism, which is like another version of neurohyperconnectivity. So it's just different ways that the neurons are firing to each other in almost like a more neuron seeking way. And it's almost like noticing so many connections at the same time. Different sensory experiences, a need for novelty and variety, whereas most autistic people need the opposite. Very interest driven dopamine system. And so, whereas an autistic person might get this from hyperfocus and like monotropic thinking, an autistic person will get an interest driven dopamine system like, oh, that's interesting over there. That's interesting over there. That's interesting over there. Haven't finished this task all the way. Haven't finished this task all the way. Haven't finished this task all the way. And again,
Whoops.
like it's such a spectrum of experiences. So I don't want to go into it loads. Because that's not the topic of our episode, but loads of different processing styles. But the thing I want to kind of emphasize is ADHD is not inattention. It's not hyperactivity, impulsivity, or mood instability. It doesn't impair your ability to think. Again, these are distress symbols. It's actually like attention to loads of things, like energy towards dopamine producers and things like that. Just like autism isn't meltdowns, it's not self-harm, it's not being antisocial. These are, again, distress symptoms. So this kind of leads me into the next definition I want to go into, which is neuroaffirmative. And so this again, like, has arisen from the neurodiversity movement, and that's really celebrating the differences of neurodivergent individuals, and in line with that, acknowledging the support needs that go along with that. Because ADHD and autism are disabilities, but not because they're impairments necessarily, but they're just not supported in our culture, our, society, interpersonally. We're kind of ingrained in a very neurotypical world. Um, and so most disabilities are disabilities because of the way the world is constructed, both physically and socially. So this in itself, living in a neurotypical world, is one of the main causes of neurodivergent burnout. So I'm going to, unless, what is there anything you want to throw in there before I've finished my bit now, my chaotic little bit, but any thoughts?
One thought I was having was how you can also get kind of a I don't know how we term it, like the comorbidity of, or like a joint diagnosis for ADHD and autism, which would be ADHD. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I think that is that around like 80% of people who will have that kind of dual diagnosis, but I think it's quite difficult to identify through diagnosis.
It is. A lot of people subconsciously, if they're late diagnosed, have been able to use their ADHD traits to mask their autism. So the kind of pathway that I've seen is people have been diagnosed with ADHD, and then they get on their ADHD medication to regulate that dopamine release and things like that, and they're able to focus more, and then they realize, something's still up here. And then they realize, oh shit, maybe I'm autistic too. And so that's kind of how that, it's not everyone obviously, but that typical dual pathway goes. And we're starting to realize that it's more rare to just be one, because they're so related in the kind of, construction of your neurons, and they're so genetic. And what we tend to see is ADHD and autistic people tend to find each other and because they balance each other out really well. And so obviously give both to their children.
Oh dear. I mean, that makes sense, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do you feel like I say this in a nice way, like just autistic?
Yes. Yeah. I am. There's not an ounce of ADHD in me. Not a single ounce. I am like very autistic. Jax has ADHD, and like we are so different in our approaches. He I don't think he's autistic, but we're so different in our needs in terms of like our traits of like thinking. So where we've like had to develop communication styles on purpose to overcome like his, because I like monologuing clearly, and that's a very autistic thing, whereas he's like do interrupt. But when that happens, because of the processing, I get distracted. I like forget what I'm gonna say. And so we've like come up with skills to try and like fit both of us. So yeah, long story short, I am quite autistic, quite high masking when I'm like out in the world. But basically my assessor like on like within the first like 30 minutes is like, yep.
It does make sense, yes.
And it was never masked by ADHD. So
no.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I think it is really interesting, like I'd gonna say concept, but not that it's concept, but interesting how they can like hide one another. And it almost makes me think in a way like, all right, well, amazing, like then you have both, and then you go back to neutral and you're fine. But it can like cause more complications, because it's like you actually never get what you want, because you're constantly fighting this battle of, like you mentioned before, like, do I want routine or do I want something novel and different? So it's almost like there's never like you're never like fully satisfied almost.
I feel like we're like so taught to think of things as linear, And so you would think, if you think about it, like ADHD is on one end of the neurodivergent spectrum and autism's on the other. And so if you have both, maybe you can get towards like the middle. Whereas like it's
Yeah.
just not that at all. They're just two different things that are their own little circles with their own spectrums. And so like, and then they're just like bouncing against each other in your brain.
Yeah.
Fun.
Super fun. So where are we now then? Okay, so well, I guess we'll start by talking a little bit about ADHD.
Let's do it.
And I suppose the links of this kind of into burnout and what kind of those experiences might be like. So we wanted to start with a listener comment, which they've said we can read out. So this is a listener who has ADHD. So they've said, every time I have a moment to spare, I get a new job or start a new project because I've forgotten the 101 other projects I already have. Now I'm working 2 nights every 6 and Monday to Friday in the daytime in another city. And then I volunteer 1 day a week in another club and I run a workshop once a week on a Monday. Then I have 2 kids and I have to get here and there and everywhere for activities every night. I'm officially burnt out. And I think maybe just the second part of this this comment I think is interesting as well. So they feel like they keep going for jobs that they love, like regardless of the pay. But now they're working more hours and earning less than they used to. They said, I'm rushing through my tasks to get them done and missing out on stepping back and enjoying the moment. So I think that's interesting too, because there's we can really strive to be in jobs we value and enjoy, but actually shoot ourselves in the foot a little bit if it means we are having to work doubly hard to get enough pay and then don't have enough time to even enjoy what we're doing. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on that comment, Kristin?
And just that like really fits into what we were talking about in terms of like dopamine search, just like that constant dopamine search. And, I think we've mentioned it in a previous episode that maybe, neurodivergent traits are evolved, but in just like, any other trait, but in the world that we evolved in, this would have been adaptive. This would have led to innovation. This would have led to like, oh, there's a deer over there, let's go get it, or whatever. Whereas now, since our brains aren't evolved for this, the ADHD brain goes, there's something I like, but it's actually now a commitment that overextends. And I can really see how that might lead to burnout.
Yeah, that's a good word, I think, to use. Like, it's that overextension that perhaps happens from that interest in so many like different things. And it's interesting as well, I think, like in today's world, it's like you should be having a job that is like long term, not necessarily like jumping around to things. And so I know the person who kind of sent in this comment, and we also had a bit of a conversation around, I don't think it's in the actual comment I read out, but the idea of how it feels good to have a project that's coming to an end and then being able to start something new. And I think that also picks up on this idea of, that novelty seeking. So rather than having, one like full-time job that we're just constantly in and like trawling through almost, and actually having it quite project-based can be more rewarding and like interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As long as it's controlled well and like those boundaries are in place, I can see. Whereas like, me, I'm like the opposite. I'm like
Kristin, the autistic person. As long as it's controlled, it's fine.
As long as we have a plan.
Yeah.
I have like so many things I want to and I love that. I like the idea when a project comes to a close, but it's also like, but I'm going to continue this in only a slightly different way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly how all my research goes. It's like, okay, well, we've closed this project on sexism or psychological safety, but that has just led to an additional question about this exact topic that we will continue. So it's like ending, but then continues at the same time. And so that's where I feel comfortable.
Oh my gosh, maybe this is why my research is like so chaotic. Maybe that says something. So, so there's quite a lot of overlap then, I guess. So with, I guess if we want to call it like ADHD burnout, there isn't really like a specific ADHD burnout like we have with autistic burnout. Um, but it's kind of burnout for people who have ADHD is quite typical, similar to a typical burnout. Um, but it can be compounded by or sort of lead to worse like mental health outcomes because of some of the, I suppose, symptoms that people might experience from ADHD. So
Mm.
so so ADHD burnout tends to be caused by like ongoing stress of trying to manage these symptoms without appropriate support, in addition to kind of other sources of stress, whether that is like from the comment, like from work or from general life, or uh, maybe like having a big family that you're needing to look after. So, and we know that general burnout is caused by this prolonged exposure to stress in like work, school, life, and so on. But the ADHD symptoms that tend to, um, I suppose, underline or emphasize some of the burnout symptoms are things like they're like impulsivity or being distracted by certain things or some of the hyperactivity. But the symptoms can include like a lack of motivation. Maybe it's having like brain fog or difficulty concentrating and forgetfulness. Um, one of the Probably like one of the main symptoms that we hear about is like hyperfocus or like an over commitment to something. And
Mm.
this is where there are periods of very intense focus, and that can then impact burnout because you're so focused for a certain period of time that actually you start like neglecting your own needs
Mm.
or overextending your energy.
Kind of
And
like this
this
comment,
can,
like if you're like you're overcommitting because it's, you know, that dopamine release in the moment, and then that commitment's a commitment, you're in it for however long. And so even your hyper focus might only last so long, though your hyper focus isn't, might not last the length of the commitment.
yeah.
So I can see how that's not just the energy of like physically doing it, but it's like mentally making yourself do something when your hyper focus is gone.
Mm, yes, that's such a good point. Yeah, it's like in this moment, yes, I'm fully committed, but give me however long. And actually now I'm recognizing maybe that's not what I'm interested in, or that's not what I have time to do. Um, yeah.
Mm.
And then we have, so like Kristen mentioned before, challenges to do with like executive dysfunction. So this with ADHD, we probably quite often hear about this in terms of like time management
Mm.
and like organization, like meeting deadlines, and this can then lead to quite like anxiety, I suppose, like promoting experiences, feelings of perhaps being a failure or not being able to like meet these deadlines that we need to. Um, and then that is probably made worse by things like emotional dysregulation. So, experiencing quite intense emotional reactions, which will lead to, of course, quicker exhaustion, especially during a stressful period.
Mm.
Um, and then maybe like the last thing to consider here is like a stigma and a misunderstanding of ADHD. So, because of this, I think there's often, well, yeah, just a lot of, I suppose, judgment. So, if you are distracted or you're not focused or you're late for something, and you get labeled as like being lazy, where it's almost like the complete opposite.
Mm.
So, this can create a lot of stress and a lot of self doubt as well for the person.
Mm.
So, we can see how like these symptoms can then almost like push you like towards burnout more quickly, and have a real impact on daily life. So whether that is just being able to complete daily tasks and maintaining routines, managing your time effectively. So yeah, what are your thoughts
Mm.
on that, Kristen?
I think all of that made me think of the two types of people who were later diagnosed with ADHD that I know, that I've seen throughout my life. And like we've probably said before, but like neurodivergent people tend to find each other. And so at the time I didn't know maybe that they were ADHD, but now I know after reflecting and me being me overanalyzing human behavior constantly, it was always something I like took note of, and now I'm adding that information in. We have, and I think it's a gender difference as well, which is supported in the literature. So on one hand, we have a woman who was late diagnosed ADHD and masked her ADHD by overcompensating with a million different notebooks, color-coded schedules, like sticky notes everywhere, reminders in the phone constantly. And that led to burnout because it was like, and I think seeking the diagnosis as well, or seeking support, because it was extending so much mental energy to kind of stay, like, no support needs. So keeping organized in your life with a brain that just wants to do everything and still being on time. This person was very high achieving, great grades in school, great athlete, things like that. But once you get into the real world and there's even more stimulus, those sticky notes don't quite make up for it anymore. And so more and more demands. And then all of a sudden they just couldn't do it anymore. And there was that feeling of like burnout caused by doing too much, trying to organize their lives and keep up with it, but then not being able to. And then I've seen the other side where they didn't have those coping mechanisms of organizing. There wasn't that almost like early gendered expectation, I don't think, to organize your own life. I feel like women are taught more that kind of like compartmentalization and multitasking, and that you need to live to a certain standard. Whereas I don't think this person was taught that. It might not be gendered, but this is what I've seen a lot in my own life, and research does support it. But missing out meetings, forgetting to put it in your calendar app because something else happened, there was an email, and so missing a meeting, just like loads of different things like that, and feeling constantly like you're letting people down. Like, well, I didn't realize you told me to do this. It completely slipped my mind, leading to feelings of guilt, feelings of like what you were talking about, like judgment about being distracted or lazy, which that wasn't happening. They were constantly on the go trying to figure it out, but it was always playing catch up. And so again, those feelings of guilt and, stigma and things like that led to, again, that burnout. So almost like two different tracks to it from the same source, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's interesting how you're linking that to those like gendered expectations as well. So on one side, it almost feels like more chaotic on the example you gave with kind of the person who was using all of like the post-it notes and like trying to plan everything. Like that sounds like so much effort. But they are likely the ones, would you say, who are being later diagnosed than the second example you gave?
The second example could have been diagnosed when they were like 5, no problem, but they weren't, just because of the stigma at the time. So everyone's always known, they'd always make a joke about them being ADD or ADHD. So it's like not surprising in terms of stigma and lack of access that they weren't diagnosed, but they would have been in today. Whereas like the other one that was able to mask it through all of this kind of organization probably would still be late diagnosed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And where do you feel we are like today in terms of like stigma related to like diagnosis?
I think it's getting better. It's much better with ADHD. It's better with autism, but still not great, because you hear this is why self-diagnosis is becoming very accepted by the neurodivergent community, because firstly, getting diagnosed, you have to be suffering already. You have to be having meltdowns. You have to be like displaying all these basically symptoms of autistic distress. And it was only 14 years ago, I think, something around then, that we realized that girls and women could be autistic. Like, and so we're still very, very far behind. So you're either, what was something I saw the other day? It's like, if you're not diagnosed yet, it's like, oh, you're kind of weird, like what's wrong with you? That you finally get diagnosed and it's like, you're not weird enough to be autistic. So we're not quite there yet. There's a lot of acceptance within the community of the broad expressions of, autism and neurodivergence more broadly. But outside of that, it's definitely not there. And it's not always necessarily meant negatively, but it still affects the person,
Yeah.
So it's still like not nice to be told that you're not autistic.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm like, I've got a certificate. It says it.
Yeah, because it's like you say, it's like, well, if I'm not, then what am I?
And what am I? You just said I was weird. You just said I was like unnerving in some way.
Yeah. But I like how you say like symptoms of like autistic like distress, and
Mm.
I don't think I've heard it put like that before, but I think that's really really useful in almost trying to, I guess, avoid some of the misunderstandings about how autism can represent itself.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
So when you characterize autism, this you're characterizing things all the way from proprioception, so that's your body position, dancing, your basically coordination, stims, so regulating energy, repetitive movements, executive function, like we were talking about, differences in relationships and communication, so like needing meaningful conversations and not small talk, eye contact, masking, bonding through special interests. You've got interoception. It's like, are you aware of your internal needs like hunger or thirst? Are you alexithymic, which means you don't necessarily know what your body's feeling? And so as long as you're in an environment where you can be autistic, so you're able to stim and you can do your hyperfocus and things like that are actual autistic traits, you won't see, and I mean, obviously there are some autistic people that do have much higher support needs because it depends on the person. But for a lot of autistic people, if they're able to engage in their neurotype, you won't see the other end of that exact, like the spectrum, which is like meltdowns, shutdowns, burnout, and stuff like that. It like struggles with executive dysfunction, because executive functioning means hyperfocus, and things like that. But when it's not good, it means like struggles with hygiene and of demand avoidance and things like that. And so it's such a broad spectrum. I can't remember why I was saying this, but like essentially, like I think we really need to decipher between diagnostic criteria, which are mostly like the way they phrase it, limited interests, and like no, that's passionate hyperfocus, or like a passionate special interest. It's
Yeah.
very deficit focused, and so it's
And it's like
actually done so
rigid
much
as well. I
harm.
think they use
Yes.
that term a lot, like rigid
Yeah.
interests.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rigid, limited. They say like black and white thinking or narrow-mindedness, when really it's just the way your neurons are structured, the processing between them. You tend to look at details before you look at the big picture. And so you
Mm,
look at both, but you just like prioritize what you're looking at differently. And
yeah,
problematizing that is an issue.
yeah. It's like it really feels like someone who's neurotypical like wrote those,
Oh, no shit.
those characteristics, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like I wonder like if somebody who is like autistic and neurodiverse like wrote it back like the other way, like
Hmm.
writing it for neurotypical people, like
Yeah.
would we be like super I suppose like not negative,
Accepting.
but yeah, negative
Yeah.
about it as well.
Yeah.
Like actually, yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think what we have to look at is, and I could go on a rant about like the medicalization, the deficit model of health and disability and stuff like that for a whole hour, so I won't.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
especially because I've been quite ingrained in the literature recently for the paper I'm writing. Um, but autism, ADHD, neurodiversity more broadly has historically been an accepted and embraced just like natural human characteristic. Like we can see a lot of that in indigenous cultures currently that all have different words for like autism and stuff like that. And they're just like, all right, that's just how this person is. They're just different. And if you look back
Yeah,
at, back in the day, even just like the Celts were like, oh, Jason, that's not a very Celtic name, but I'm going to go with it.
Jason.
Jason like hasn't been down to the town for a month. He just stays up and does his sheep farming and never speaks to anyone, but that's fine. That's just what Jason does. You know what I
Classic
mean?
Jason.
Classic
Yeah,
Jason.
yeah. But there was that
And
thing. Did you see that thing I sent you on Instagram about the
probably not.
Maori
I'm terrible at
term?
looking at my
Because
messages.
this is so strange because I literally only saw it the other day. I sent it to you, but you're kind of talking about it there. Like the
Hmm.
Maori have their own word for autism. I cannot remember what it was, but it had some sort of meaning which was like, I'm gonna mess this up probably, but it was something like just like give them space and like let them do like their thing,
Oh,
basically.
I've seen, let me just Google it real quick because it actually
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
really nice,
It was really nice. But they were basically from this short video I watched, it seemed like they very much just allowed the autistic person to just kind of be
mhm.
themselves and like
Yeah.
do what they wanted to do, and yeah, it was just seemed like a very like acceptance kind of based view
hmm
on that, rather than being like, oh, they're different, like why are they doing these weird things?
Yes, it's not
You
deficit
know,
based. I won't say the word, but it means in their own time and space, which very much kind of reflects it. And
you
I
should
think,
try and say the word.
oh, no way. I'm too white for that.
Oh, fair enough.
uh, I would just be offensive. Um, but I think like the medical model, as everything else with our Western view of medicine, is based off of problematizing and looking at things as deficit and then reacting off of problems rather than proactive, looking at traits, things like that. And honestly, I would love to do an episode on the medical model of health because it addresses health, mental health. We have all this historical data bias that informs our understanding of health, like the fact that women weren't involved in clinical trials until the 90s, things like that. So that's another tangent. And because we're already so far into the episode, I feel like I should quickly go into autistic burnout so we can touch on recovery a little bit before the end. Um, but autistic burnout is a bit different than ADHD burnout because ADHD burnout is kind of like neurotypical burnout, but it's made worse by ADHD symptoms. So having ADHD is a risk factor for worse burnout symptoms, essentially. Whereas autistic burnout is a specific burnout as a result of being autistic in a neurotypical world. So it's conceptualized as resulting from chronic life stress and a mismatch of expectations and abilities without the adequate supports. And I don't really like that definition because it implies that an ability to function in a neurotypical world is the only thing that matters. But it's basically characterized by pervasive long term, so like more than 3 months, exhaustion, loss of function, and reduced tolerance to stimulus. And it really affects every aspect of your life. And this is how I realized I was autistic. So I'll describe this, and then if anything pops up, I'll explain my story rather than, because didn't have a listener comment about autism. But autistic people, tend to feel pressure to meet neurotypical standards. This adds to the stress, feeling inadequate. And again, the stimulation of a neurotypical world can be really harmful. So whether that's like sensory things, like whether it's sound, light, things like I working in a hospital setting, I can hear every single freaking machine. I can hear every light. I was getting my microneedling facial the other day and they had spa music on, and I could hear the LED lights over the spa music. And I was like, this is not relaxing. Oh, I mean, I had needles going in my face, but that was more relaxing than the sound. Um, looking at like boundaries, like physical boundaries, the need for alone time. This can lead to a specific type of burnout called autistic burnout. So this is down to kind of like sensory overload. So if you're not able to manage environments with excessive noise, lights, crowds, masking can really contribute to autistic burnout. So you're suppressing your autistic traits to fit in. Social exhaustion. So not having those boundaries, like, constantly, like the holiday season, say you're seeing people every day socially, and executive function. So if you're pushing your executive function, like we were talking with that ADHD person, can lead to losing the ability to do things you could normally do, extreme executive dysfunction, which I would describe as I just can't. You know what I mean? Increased or decreased sensory sensitivities and exhaustion. So kind of my experience with this was not knowing that I was autistic and masking for my entire life, and especially extreme masking from maybe the age of like 17, 18 until maybe about 31, to 32. So like 14 years of extreme masking to the point where I didn't even read fantasy books anymore because I was like masking at it all moments of my life. I was always feeling perceived. So masking, masking, masking. forcing myself into social and sensory activities that I wasn't meant to be doing. But I just thought everyone was going through these experiences and I was just doing it wrong. Do you know what I mean? And doing this for so long led to what was misdiagnosed as depression. And autistic burnout is often diagnosed as depression because loss of executive function, not wanting to do the things that you enjoy, being tired, those can be, attributed to depressive, whether that's disorder or symptoms. And so I was going through therapy for depression and none of it was working. And so that made me recognize there was something else going on, essentially. And I sought my autism diagnosis after a while. And essentially, my treatment for depression was making my burnout more because making my burnout worse because you treat depression the opposite you would treat autistic burnout. And that's why autistic burnout needs to be its own kind of category, because the expectations of a neurotypical society outweigh what we can physically and mentally do. And so depression, you usually integrate activities into your life to kind of build upon positive experiences and increase your dopamine levels. Whereas autistic burnout involves being autistic, whether that's individually, allowing yourself to engage with your special interests, putting boundaries in place, trying to deconstruct your masking, which is what I've been working on the last 2 years. Actually, it's only been like a year and a bit, but I'm trying to figure out who I am under that mask because it was very different. Like the blonde volleyball player from America, and now I'm like the feminist witch.
I prefer that one.
Yeah, me too. And just stuff like that. I don't know if any of that's made sense or like kind of connected, or if I've given a good description of what autistic burnout looks like.
Yeah, no, I think that was really useful. And I think it's interesting how the treatment for depression was actually making things worse. So that was that kind of like, so for the treatment for depression, it was more like getting you out and almost like socializing more, whereas actually you needed, like you said, boundaries and actually alone time and rest and engaging in like very specific interests, which perhaps you weren't able to identify through the therapy for depression.
Yeah, it was a lot of like, obviously we try to get people to get in touch with their feelings. Firstly, not knowing I was alexithymic, I was like, why the hell can't I figure out what I'm feeling? Why am I numb? I wasn't numb. I'm alexithymic. I've got emotions. I just don't know what the hell they are sometimes. And it's like, get out, socialize, engage with the people you care about, where I just sometimes don't have that capacity because that mental social capacity sometimes isn't there. It almost is like cross too many boundaries. It's like figure out how to do things that you shouldn't really be doing. Do you know what I mean? And whereas like recovering from autistic burnout could literally just be looking like the first step is just be autistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Allow yourself to stim. I didn't even know I had sensory sensitivities until like 6 months ago because I was masking that as well. You know what I mean? And I think what happened to me is, and this happens a lot of the time for autistic people, I heard in my evaluation, is when I'm going to like big, loud social events, if it's acceptable, I'll be drinking because that, and a lot of autistic people online have said this as well, like that helps dull some of your senses and it makes it so that you're less feeling less pressured and judged about masking. And so once I stopped relying on that, all these sensory sensitivities came out. And I'm like, now I've got like my stim toy and my loop earplugs. And my mom got me for Christmas last year this really nice like fidget ring. And now that I'm not masking that stuff in public anymore, it's more tolerable to do that. But I also still have drawn way more significant boundaries around when I'll go out and things like that. But then the problem is you get that stigma that we were talking about earlier. God, you're just acting so much more autistic now. And you're like, yeah, because not acting autistic caused me to go into freaking autistic burnout and my mental health to plummet. So I think what we need to think about is this trajectory, right? So autistic burnout can get confused with depression, but in reality, autistic burnout can lead to depression and anxiety. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety when really I was having autistic burnout and meltdowns because my panic attacks were actually meltdowns the whole time. Yeah.
That's mad, isn't it?
Mm.
And yeah. And it's interesting as well, I think the link with anxiety and maybe like particularly like social anxiety.
Mm.
Because I don't know, I like thinking about kind of some of my experiences, and I would always get very like sensory, like overwhelmed in restaurants, but I always felt like it was like just anxiety.
Mm.
Um, and but it was always the sounds,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like
Yeah.
when you're in a restaurant and you can feel like everything clattering and you can hear like
It just made
multiple
me cringe
conversations.
thinking about that.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, it like makes
Yeah.
me feel physically sick.
Yeah.
Like things
Yeah.
like that would always get me, but not always. But if I was feeling a certain way or I'd had like a bad day, or I guess whatever
Mm.
that might be,
Yeah.
then those environments are like unbearable.
So much worse.
It's like the bucket is full and
Mm-hmm.
you've put me in this environment and I'm just overflowing, and then that's the shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
And I always hate that because you're like, often when you are out at a restaurant, it's because, oh, maybe it's for like a special occasion or you're going out
Mm-hmm.
to have like a nice time with family or with friends, but it's just unbearable. And then I think there's also a lot of guilt associated
Yes.
with that. But that, I don't know, maybe it is anxiety, but for me, I think there's a bit of confusion around, is that anxiety or is it like something else?
How I would differentiate that from both my own experiences, other people's experiences, and what more recent literature is starting to say, because it used to be termed social anxiety, but I'm not so sure that's right. Um, is that sounds like sensory overload to me. Social anxiety that often comes with being autistic is nerves surrounding needing to mask, getting the social situation right. Um, Not wanting to socialize necessarily, not because you need that boundary, just because you're nervous about being social. Whereas, like, the sensory aspect of socializing, I think, is sensory overload. And I totally get that. I don't know if you remember when we went out for dinner after I submitted my doctorate, and I told you guys, I was like, I struggle to eat in these environments. I love food. I can down an entire pizza to myself, but in those loud, kind of surrounded by people environments, I don't know, and I've always struggled with this and never known why, because I love food so much, but I'm like, I struggle to eat. And it's really depressing when I'm going to a restaurant and I'm like, it's easier if it's just me and Jack and we're like put in a corner. You know what I mean?
Yes, the
Um,
corner is the
the
best.
corner, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And I'm smiling because I'm like thinking about times at restaurants that I've had that have been really embarrassing. I remember once, this is super embarrassing, but once went out to a restaurant and I ordered something and it was horrible and
Oh
I really
no.
didn't like it. So I was
Sad.
like, that's fine, like I'm just not gonna eat it. And then, oh my God, this is absolute nightmare. Then Matt said to the waiter that I didn't like the food, and I was like, why did you say that? And then the chef came out and like, I'm so sorry you
Nightmare.
didn't enjoy the food. Can I get you something else? And I was like, no, it's fine.
I'll just
And
starve.
I like literally after he'd left, I literally just started crying at the table, and I was
Oh,
like, please, can we leave now? Like, oh my God, like I
oh my
can't believe you've
God,
done this to me.
no.
That was horrific.
Oh, that
Yeah.
sucks. I would be so sad.
Ugh.
Oh God. Should we quickly touch on, I think I've mentioned a little bit how to solve autistic burnout, which essentially is, being autistic, allowing yourself rest, allowing yourself boundaries, that self-awareness of knowing your own needs, because everyone's so different, and actually implementing those support needs. So for example, instead of having meetings every day, I will try to struggle. Well, I do struggle sometimes. I will try to schedule like a day of hyperfocus and research, and then I'll have a day of all meetings so that I don't have to like
Mm.
always be mentally prepared to socialize. It's just like for each person. But I know you had some stuff that would also be useful to pop in there.
Yeah. So I suppose some things are. So it's like whether we can like be aware of what perhaps some of the likely causes are, whether we're tracking our mood or being more aware when things shift and change, or even like what's making some of these like pre-burnout experiences
It's hard to track your mood
worse.
when you're alexithymic.
That though. Right, so I've been trying to track my mood recently, and I find that it's either I'm sad or indifferent. And I find it really difficult sometimes to more notice like the positive emotions.
Mm.
Um, but one thing my therapist she says to me is to try and it's probably in a way like less about the feelings and more about just like finding little moments that like you're doing something that you enjoy.
Mm.
Um, so I don't know if that's kind of helpful in terms of an example. You're probably you know more than me, but perhaps more than getting like over because I can be overthinking. I'm like, why aren't I happy or excited about
Mm.
something? It's instead like, is this something that I enjoy and find value in? I don't know.
I think that's a good way of looking at it because, firstly, negative emotions are much easier to recognize because our brains are just evolved to do that. Whereas, like, positive ones can be so much more difficult. And I struggle with the conceptualization of happiness as a positive emotion because happiness and joy are great, but that doesn't mean they're like the only positive thing. Being neutral, I think, is also a positive,
Mm,
because I think there's just this overemphasis on being happy all the time, which just is literally not real
yes.
unless you have some kind of disorder. Literally your brain's not quite wired right. And even when that happens, say you're bipolar or have these like really extreme mood swings, you used to get the other end of the stick. So I think really what we should be looking for is more neutral, and then bits of life
Mm,
and of your day that you're finding joy and just enjoying yourself a little bit. So that's why I'm like, I mean, this goes down like one of my autistic strategies is I have to put alarms on my phone because I forget when to, if I have a hyperfocus, I forget when to eat or drink because I'm not aware of when I'm hungry or thirsty. But I've made my 11 o'clock mocha that I have every single day into my moment of joy because I love my routines. I'll go in, make my mocha, listen to a podcast, come in, just like, just like, it's just like, oh, I love this part of my day. And it sounds so
yeah.
small, but just like those really tiny little things that you enjoy.
Yes. You see, I wish I could do that, but I feel like all of my mornings are just so varied and chaotic
Mm.
that I don't even know what I'm doing half of the time. I'm like, just try and get out of the door, or just remember to like brush your teeth.
That sounds like executive dysfunction.
You really think it's that? But yeah, I think when we can carve out those moments, I think that's something that sometimes I get frustrated with. Is I feel like I struggle to carve out these moments of rest and like being present and just taking note of like the simple things, which
Mm.
are, like you say, joyful, or just relaxing, or just like you say,
Yeah.
neutral,
Hmm.
um, and almost just allowing yourself to press pause. Like that's something I find really difficult, but something I recognize is really important for if we are trying to support ourselves through burnout or pre-burnout.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's this idea of permission as well, which I always come back to, but giving yourself permission to do that and to enjoy things. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and learning a way that rests for work that works for you. And I think it's interesting in this word like rest when it comes to someone who has ADHD, is that this idea of rest might actually involve like movement or getting up and
Mm.
doing something different rather than, just sitting down and I don't know, watching TV. I love doing
Yeah,
that
no,
though.
absolutely. So this
Yeah.
literally happened the other day. I said to Jack, we were sitting down for the evening to like, I was reading, he was watching TV, and we were both relaxing. And I said to him, firstly, I need to get like a blinder on one side of my eye so I can't see you constantly moving so much. And then secondly, I was like, we need to like film a time lapse of like our hour of relaxing because I like don't move. I might flip over a little bit on the couch here every few minutes. Not even then,
Yeah.
like maybe 30 minutes. I won't even get up to use the bathroom because I'm so focused. Whereas he's like
Yeah.
up, down, phone, scroll, up, down. What's going on? Kristin, what about this? Flick the channel, YouTube, clicking buttons. And I'm just
Yeah.
like constant movement, but that's him resting in like what his brain wants
Mm.
to do. Whereas I'm just
Yeah.
like hyperfocus, like fantasy book, and this is how my brain rests.
Yeah.
So it just looks different
Yeah.
for everyone.
Definitely. And so I think that's something good to like reflect on is what does rest look like for you? And it doesn't have to be a conventional way of resting.
Yes, love that.
Yeah. Some other things like say no to stuff.
Mm.
So don't overcommit
Boundaries.
yourself. Make the boundaries at the time. You may really want to say yes, and it might feel good to say yes, but
That's
do yourself
dopamine.
a favor and like think about yourself in a couple of weeks' time and how that person will hate you because you said yes to this thing. This is what I need to do.
And how you will hate that person because you said yes to this thing.
Totally. So practice saying no. And then something maybe I wanted to like quickly talk about. I know we were kind of quite long in, but just super briefly. So something that might help in terms of like prioritization, maybe particularly for ADHD, but perhaps forward into it, we can talk about it. But there's this thing called the Eisenhower matrix, which one of my friends introduced me to. And when she initially introduced it to me, I really didn't like it because I felt like it was too like rigid, like putting things in boxes. But I have more recently tried to use some of it. And I think it has actually been helping. So I'll just really quickly go over this. It's basically where you can split your tasks into 4 different quadrants or kind of sections. So you split your tasks into whether something's urgent and important, important and not urgent, urgent, not important, and then not urgent and not important.
I'll put this in the video and maybe link it in the bio as well so that people can see. Or you guys know how to use Google, Google the Eisenhower matrix.
Yes, Google it. That'll make this make more sense. But I'm maybe just going to focus on like the top 2 for now. But basically, if you're always working on tasks that are urgent and really important, you're basically in this crisis mode and you're just always dealing with emergencies and trying to put out fires and everything's super last minute. So ideally, like we want to try and be in this like second quadrant where we're working on things that are important, but it's not urgent. So there's not a looming deadline. And this can feel much more like we're in flow and that we're dealing with issues before they arrive. Now, this would be amazing. Like in an ideal world, like I would love for this to happen. I think my problem with it somewhat is that I feel like I can't avoid being in that crisis mode because everything almost feels important and urgent. So one, like, how do I categorize that? And also, is it almost like we were talking about in the previous episode when it comes to like work and burnout? There are just so many tasks that we need to complete that. Is it realistic for us to consider not being in crisis mode?
I have a lot of opinions on this, which is probably not surprising to anyone. So I can see how this would be useful, especially for a neurotypical person. If you're a neurodivergent, you have a different way of processing what's urgent and what's not urgent because of process. Like for autistic people, I think it has to do with your literal and maybe monotropic thinking. And for maybe ADHD people, it's where the dopamine's coming from. So things just might always feel urgent no matter what. And I think from my perspective, it's a phrase like just do your best and then you'll be fine. If you have very literal thinking, you think that means I have to do my best all the time. That means I have to be perfect or I'm not doing it right. And so you would always look at everything as urgent and important. Every email I get, I'm like, if I don't respond straight away, I feel guilty. I mean, I've implemented boundaries now.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't think that this is always going. It could, if you said it's helping you, that's awesome. But I think this needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because if I
Mm,
use this, I would go into burnout, because I would never get into any of the quadrants other than urgent, important. Whereas like now
yeah.
now that I know I'm autistic and I have boundaries, I could probably take it with a grain of salt and use it a little bit. But like I I would even find it hard to put these in the boxes, because I think I've barely just gotten to either it's urgent or it's not urgent. And is it in a boundary or is it not in a boundary? And that's kind of
Yeah.
how I've fixed my own burnout. So I feel like maybe it'll work
Yeah.
for avoiding burnout or like pre-burnout, but I don't think it'll help fix any burnout, if that makes
Mm,
sense. But it's very different per
yes.
person. Sorry, what are your
And
thoughts on
that's
it?
No, it's just interesting hearing you say that, because the way I've been using this is basically ignoring the not important parts, because I think everything's important. Like,
Hmm.
well, so I've only been categorizing in the urgent and important. So that's basically, do I need to get this done by tomorrow? And it's like in that category, versus if it's not urgent, then it's like, okay, maybe I have like, if I don't need to literally do this today.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's helped for me to just prioritize a little bit. But
Hmm.
I'm only using those two categories because it annoys me in a way, because it's like certain emails are not important. I'm like, really though? Like, yes,
How do
okay,
you
maybe if I'm
know?
getting some like promotional emails from a
Hmm.
bot, yeah, that's probably not important. But do you really know? Because there could be a really good offer in there. So it's it's like, so that's how so actually, yes, like I've edited how I use it.
Mm. Yes, you have to
So
really
maybe that's,
personalize. Cause look, it
yeah,
has
yeah.
on not urgent and not important. It has video gaming. Well, what if that's your special interest? And what if that's how you? I love how you just not
Yeah.
even read that box. You haven't even read the not urgent, not important
That's
box.
no, I decided not to look at it. I actually think this was one of my things when I was talking to my friends initially, and I felt like I was being attacked, because I was like, why is this not important to
Mm.
have this time for yourself?
Yeah. So
Um,
that's I have a lot of problems with this. I'm gonna get in touch with Eisenhower.
yeah. Let's find them and tell
Find
them what we think.
I have no
So
problems doing
yeah.
that.
But maybe that's something to kind of well, I guess kind of reflect on, like some of a lot of the things that we say, obviously take them with a pinch of salt. Think about
Hmm.
kind of what works for you. If any of the things we've spoken about here you think might be useful, then give them a go. But then obviously, kind of as we said in the last episode, like if you do have burnout symptoms which are persisting despite kind of efforts to try and reduce that or kind of help yourself, then do reach out to a healthcare provider or mental health professional.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it is manageable and it is okay to ask for help. So yeah, if you have recognized yourself in any of what we've been talking about, do talk to somebody about it. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of then like a reflection that might be useful, so if you are neurodiverse, it's perhaps useful to kind of reflect on like your boundaries, what you have in place at the moment. If there are any boundaries you could feel like you can set for yourself in order to help you kind of prevent, like reaching pre-burnout or burnout. And it might also just be reflecting on, are there any of these symptoms that you are experiencing at the moment, and kind of where did they show up like throughout your life. And I suppose if you're listening and you're not neurodiverse, if there's anyone in your life who is, that you can support, perhaps offering to have conversations or just being open to having those discussions if they want to. And yeah, and it hopefully as well, it's just a bit of awareness for anybody who isn't that in touch with like the neurodiverse community.
Definitely. I think adding on that, one of the hardest things to recognize in yourself is executive dysfunction. And I think kind of doing a reflection surrounding whether you're feeling that. So if you're feeling like, well, I really want to do these dishes because I want a clean kitchen, or I really want to do XYZ, but I just can't make myself do it. And sometimes that can just make you feel lazy or guilty. If you're experiencing things like that, it might be time to like reflect and do some introspection, whether you're neurodiverse or not. So for some reason that just popped up. Like I wanted to throw that in there too. So we have done a pretty long episode. So if you've held in there for the whole time, thank you guys so much for listening. As usual, we have more questions than answers, but we really enjoyed that is exploring burnout and neurodiversity. Did this leave you with any questions? Please comment and let us know. We'd also love to know if you have any topics you want us to explore. Make sure to like, follow, engage however your platform allows. Also tell your friends. Engagement really helps us get out there as well, so that would be super helpful. You can find us on various social media platforms. The link's in the bio of our Instagram page, and also I'll stick it in the show notes. And remember, the first step to understanding is asking, but why?
Yay.